Good evening. My name is Michelle Stempian, Education and Community Programs Manager at the Holland Museum. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I appreciate people joining us from Zoom rather than in person because of the weather. So we appreciate you being here this evening for the second of our two-part series of talks highlighting the golden age of Dutch art and some of the outstanding works of art in the Holland Museum galleries. Please remain on mute throughout the presentation and of course type in any questions that you may have into the chat and we will share those questions at the end. Tonight's program will be recorded and both tonight's and last week's talks will be posted to the museum's website in a few days. Before we begin, I have a few announcements to make and some information to share about our current exhibition and some upcoming programs. But before I do that, even though we are not physically together this evening, I'd like to take a moment to honor the space that the Holland Museum and the Capon and Settlers House Museums occupy. The Holland area surrounds Lake Makatawa, ancestrally known to the Potawatomi, Odawa, and Peoria nations as Meketugami, or Black Lake. Each nation has their own rich cultural traditions and beliefs that still survive today. We, the Holland Museum, acknowledge that this land is sacred, and we commit to honoring the land and the indigenous peoples who have stewarded it for generations through continuing education, partnerships, and self-reflection. Thank you. Our current exhibition, In Service to Others, a history of Holland's women missionaries, explores the varied roles of local women in the missionary field who sought to improve lives through expansion of education and healthcare to communities across the globe. This exhibition will only be open a little while longer until November 28th. And just as a reminder, the museum's current hours are Mondays, Fridays, and Saturdays from 10 until 5. And we are always open the second Monday of the month in the evening from 4 to 7 for free. So we encourage you to come see this exhibition before it closes. Our next Tales from the Archives program will actually be going on the road and is a collaboration between the Holland Museum, Hope College, and the Herrick District Library. This talk discussing the Ottawa County Poor Farm will take place on Friday, December 2nd at 4 p.m. at the Herrick District Library and will feature the research of Professor Wayne Tan and Hope College students Chloe Barris, Aubrey Brolsma, and Ty Overheiser. Please come and join us at the Herrick Library for this free program. And we have some wonderful family programs coming up on Saturday, December 10th. You can join us for two programs in the same day from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. We will be at the museum for a trip around the world as we explore different cultural holidays with art activities, stories, and history games at our second Holidays Around the World program. And this is included with museum admission. Children 5 and under are free. And then later in the afternoon from 1 to 4 p.m. at the Capon House, you can walk through the house, enjoy Victorian holiday decorations, carols performed by the Holland Chorale Dickens Singers, and learn about Victorian holiday traditions and the Capon family from our museum docents, and enjoy some hot chocolate and a Victorian themed craft activity in our visitor center. And this program is also included with admission, and children 5 and under are free. You can learn more about each of these programs and many others at hollandmuseum.org. And as we continue to offer these programs at little or no cost, so we can be as accessible as possible to the community, we hope you will support our efforts with a donation to the Holland Museum using the link on the screen. Thank you. So on to tonight's program. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Dr. Henry Luttikhuizen. Author, curator, and art historian, Dr. Luttikhuizen has taught at Kendall College of Art and Design, Calvin College, and is currently a scholar in residence at Grand Valley State University, and is also teaching a course at Hope College this fall in 2022. He received his BA in art history and political science from Calvin College, a master's in philosophical aesthetics from the Institute for Christian Studies, and an MA and PhD in art history from the University of Virginia. He has published numerous books and articles and is currently working on projects focused on late medieval and early Netherlandish art. So please welcome Dr. Henry Luttikhuizen. And I will stop sharing my screen, Henry, and turn things over to you.
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted. Go
That
right.
is a good start. Okay.
Henry, I accidentally muted you, so unmute yourself.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Shared. Okay. We're good? All right. Well, thank you for the fine introduction, and it's always a pleasure to do things for the Holland Museum. Last week, I addressed still life paintings, and in particular, those representing flowers. And I want to start there again, just to kind of rehearse a few things for those of you who are there, and then also to provide a bit of an introduction for those of you that weren't there last week. And the big points that I raised in relationship to the flowers is first of all, these painters are interested in doing something highly naturalistic. So there's a way in which art imitates nature. But at the same time, what fascinates them is the kind of artifice of nature itself. That is to say, they like the wonders of nature. There's this preoccupation with the beautiful richness of the things of this world. And so it goes both sides. It's not just that it's naturalistic, and it's, of course, not just artifice. They're intertwined. And the Dutch use two phrases quite a bit in relationship to this kind of painting and as well with the landscape painting. And the first thing they'll say is naar het leven, which means afterlife. Okay, so that you have depictions that, again, kind of represent or correspond closely to what we experience in nature. And the other phrase they use is uit den geest. And what that means is out of the spirit. And the spirit in this case is the imagination. So when you see something like this, it's a kind of plausible fiction. Okay, at first glance, yeah, it looks real, but these flowers do not all bloom at the same time. You wouldn't put that many flowers in a single bouquet. So there are ways in which this is highly artificial. The other thing I want you to bear in mind in regards to this is that the vase below is Chinese. There's this cosmopolitan quality to these paintings. And we're going to find that too when it comes to the landscapes. There's going to be an interest in showing things Dutch, but also things that are far away and perhaps even fantastic. So in some ways, we're going to have an art of describing. It'll be empirical observation, but it will also be kind of prescriptive, and there'll be a moral element associated with it. It'll be tied to emblematic literature, but it won't be, just a visual sermon. So there's a way in which these things are made to enlighten, or if you will, to instruct and delight. So here we go. So let's begin talking about landscape. And to do so, I'm going to begin way back in 1430s with Jan van Eyck. The painting I'm showing you is about the size of the image projected on your screen. Okay? It's about the size of a postcard. It's in Philadelphia, and it represents Francis receiving the stigmata. The moment is that he is so intensely devout, preoccupied with the life of Christ, especially his passion, that as he's meditating, the signs or the marks of the crucifixion appear on his body. And that's why you see his hands and his feet. And you have a little, well, they're marks. They don't necessarily represent holes, but to indicate, again, his proximity to Christ. Now, what's important for our purposes here is the fact that the artist is trying to show something microscopic and telescopic at the same time. So there's a preoccupation with showing the cityscape way in the distant background, and yet also showing the rockiness of the foreground. And you even have a little stream by his assistant there Brother Leo. So I want you to get the idea here that it's not just important that you represent a saint, but that the saint is put in a natural setting. It's to call attention to the reality of that saint in our world. And because St. Francis is from Italy, it's a little bit exotic. You're not going to find rocks like this in the Netherlands, okay? It's not intended to look Dutch. It's intended to look to the place where Francis and Brother Leo would have been. It's also rocky because they want to suggest something of, or Yavanek wants to suggest something of a wilderness ideal. Okay, move about 60 years down the road. Geertken tot St. Jan's, and or Little Jerry, who lived with a group of monks at St. John's. He's representing the patron saint here, John the Baptist, who we often think of in relationship to a wilderness. But what the painter has done in this instance is he has the city in the background. You can just make it out, and that'd be the city of Haarlem. And the painting's hanging in a monastery in the midst of Haarlem. But just outside of Haarlem were very famous woods. And what Geertken has done is represented that forest. And you have to think, well, why would he do that? Well, on the one hand, it's this fascination with the natural world. You have not just Christ there as the Lamb of God, but you got, if you look carefully, various birds flying around, bunny rabbits, deer in the background. Okay, so you have that. But there's also, again, kind of a symbolic quality to this. The wilderness in this case is understood as the new Eden. He's next to Christ. Okay, so it's the idea is that it's kind of like going back to the garden. So it's a very different understanding than just wilderness. And I'm pointing that out to you because, okay, you have one artist working in the Netherlands doing this. About the same time, we have Bosch. Very different. Here, the landscape, and again, it's a vast landscape. It's kind of panoramic with lots of little details, is much more fantastic. Okay, much more openly imaginative as you look at those rocky structures in the background. But of more interest is next to the Baptist, you have this bizarre plant. It's kind of exotic. And admittedly, if I showed you the underdrawings of this through an X-ray, you would see a person. He probably didn't pay for the painting and so was erased out of it. So he's been replaced by this giant plant. There was a man there, okay? Now, when you look at the plant and the birds pecking at it, it's a special kind of plant. And this is a little bit vile, to say the least, but the plant's name comes from the Dutch word vies, which some of you may know. Vies means something like really disgusting. Not to ruin anybody's appetite here, but it's more than just being a little bit gross. It's like someone who picks gum off the back of a chair and then starts chewing on it. Or if you see vomit and you can make out what the person ate, okay? It's got to be a little bit over the top. Okay, so anyway, that plant's name is wolfvies. It's the feast of a wolf. It's like wet flagellants, okay? And in English, what we would say is it's a puffball. So when you see the puffball, you think in terms of, the putrid smell, and it's to convey, again, the quality of this world. So for Bosch, this world is nothing more than stench or stink. And that's being conveyed here, as opposed to it being like a paradise. The world's a mess as far as he's concerned. So you have two artists working about the same time. One looks rather idyllic, and then this one here, more chaotic, more troublesome. I just want you to see that there's a variation here. Now, all the pictures I've shown you thus far were used as devotional pieces. They're for single people to look at and try to get at some kind of meaning. We also have large scale pictures like this. These are very large external wings to an altarpiece that would have been made for Dordrecht, for a church there. And what it represents is a very important, well, disaster that happened on St. Elizabeth Day in the area around Dordrecht, or what today we'd call Den Haag or The Hague. And basically what transpired is a huge flood came. You can see the breaking of the dike in the upper right corner. And what's going on here, as you see the piece, various things going on in the town on that day. If you go to the left, you see a church. The painting hung in that church. When it opened up, it showed us the life of St. Elizabeth. Okay, those panels are gone now. But nonetheless, what I want you to see here is how they're using very high horizon to give lots of information about the local setting. It's an altarpiece. You don't need to do that. Most times you'd have lives of saints represented. But in this case, they chose to represent their community as it was 50, 60 years ago when that flood occurred. So it's commemorating what transpired. Now, around 1530, give or take a couple of years, we're going to get something brand new. It's called an art market. We take this for granted, but it basically had to start somewhere. It began in Antwerp, and it was right next to the stock exchange. So that's pretty convenient, right, to be buying and selling works of art right next to that. And these people were gaining affluence like crazy, or prosperity. And what gave that to them around Antwerp was the Scheldt River, that it was a cosmopolitan center for banking, and lots and lots of trade went through that community. Much more than even Venice, about 10 times what you'd expect with Venice went through Antwerp. And in time, they're going to have so much shipping going through there that the river, it's going to get basically plugged up and silted. And what they're going to have to do is find a new capital city for commerce. And it's going to change to this little town in the north known as Amsterdam. But Amsterdam wasn't the big town. The big city was the one next to it, Haarlem, which is now, kind of a bedroom community for Amsterdam. Now, I'm raising that to you because the painter who made this piece, Mozart, is from Haarlem. But rather than depict something that's local, he became preoccupied with showing something exotic. And what you're seeing represented here is the conquest of the conquistadores, okay, with Coronaro. So this is like the Missouri River. It doesn't quite look like that to us, right? But I want you to get the idea here. The artist is trying to imagine what that would have been like. So, he thinks of Native Americans as basically running around in the nude. You have these strange kinds of homes where they're living into the rocks. And if you look closely to your right, you'll see the men in armor, or the Spanish. So all kinds of things are happening here. You consider the animals in the foreground, and some of them might think, oh, yeah, you can imagine those in the States. All right, fair enough. But if you go right about in the middle of the picture, where you have that broken tree, you have a seated monkey. Okay, you're not going to get those kind of monkeys in the States. Yeah, it's a combination. It's something that is based on kind of the scientific understanding that he might have, or reports of what's going on in America. But a lot of it's filled in with his imagination. Pottinger is one of the earliest landscape painters we have. And when I say pure landscapes, okay, this is not a devotional image. This was sold as a landscape. And yet it still has a devotional quality, which I'll come to in a moment. What we have is a very high horizon line. And you see Sharon, the oarsman, who takes souls into the afterworld. Okay, so if you think about the coins that are placed on the eyes, that's to pay the oarsman, or Sharon. And so he's taking a soul across the river Styx. And you can see the soul seated in the foreground of the boat. Okay, now as he's going down the road, you have down the river, you have two sides, two possible places where he could port. On what is your right, you'll see in the background burning buildings. It's, demolished. It's troublesome. On the other side, on your left, it looks serene. Okay, with that crystalline palace in the background. Now, if you're given a choice, which one you want to be in, okay, I think you're hoping that the oarsman turns right, because that's going to be more peaceful, tranquil. You have angels there. I mean, it's basically heaven. Turns left to the sinister side, he takes the soul to hell. So as we're looking at this, at first glance, we think, oh yeah, we know which way we want to go. But would we if we were in the ship or in the boat? Because what happens is, if you look carefully, the two entryways are radically different. Hell looks, inviting. It has this quality of being, literally tempting. Okay, because you think, oh, that's going to be nice, because you can't. If you're on the ship, you couldn't see what's in the background. On the other hand, going to the right, you have rocks, and the boat could easily be punctured. And so it's a little bit more about trials and tribulations. Now, everything I've just said to you, in a way, is addressing the pilgrimage of life. And that's what they're thinking about as they're looking at a painting like this. Moral choices to be made. And it becomes a conversational piece, as well as a way of re-articulating your faith, or trying to maybe enrich it through looking at the landscape. Again, lots of delight in the details, and you could just enjoy it for that. But at the same time, there's this more spiritual dimension. Probably the most important artist for making the transition from devotional art with a landscape in it to much more pure landscape is going to be Peter Bruegel. And this is a landscape during the flight into Egypt. Okay. It has a very high horizon. And when you look at the landscape, it's like you have a little bit of everything, right? You get mountains, you get valleys, you get water, you've got trees, cloud. I mean, it's everything. And what art historians call this is basically a world landscape, because it has so much of this cosmic quality to it. Now, as the Holy Family is going to Egypt, and again, this doesn't look like it's Egypt, but it would be exotic. It looks okay, maybe a bit plausible, although the landscape seems imaginary. But then if you look in the lower right, you have this tree with new spikes coming out of it and a bird on top. Well, right next to it, or attached to the tree, is actually a shrine dedicated to the Virgin Mary. Okay, historically, if you're thinking just chronologically, you got a problem here. How could you have a shrine to the Virgin Mary already at that point? But the artist is thinking about you going through the painting as if it's a pilgrimage, that when you're wandering it through it with your eyes, you're, in a sense, thinking about these devotional issues. That's still happening. This is the very last painting we have from him. It was put in a will to his wife, Magpie on a Gallows. Magpies are known for spreading rumors. Okay, so again, they have a symbolic quality, but they're also meticulously painted here. And again, we can take pleasure in the little things of this world. Now we have gallows right in the middle. Okay, so we associate that, of course, with execution, hanging, but no one presently is being hung. And then our eyes kind of wander both sides to the picture. And you can go down again towards that large building in the lower right. And you'll even see a cross in between the gallows and that building down below. On the other side, we have peasants dancing. They're having a good time. They're not really paying attention. Meanwhile, in the lower left is a man defecating. And there's a saying in Dutch about defecating on the gallows. It's somebody who doesn't take death seriously. So as we're looking at this painting, it has these, again, moral elements to it. It has this kind of spiritual lesson attached to it. But at the same time, it's just beautiful to look at this panorama and consider all these details in different spaces. Artists are going to basically be informed by Bruegel. And one of his close imitators is a person we don't know his name. He's just known as the master of the small landscapes. And he made pen drawings then that were reproduced as prints and put in folios. And when you look at his little scenes, and again, it's slightly smaller than you see projected on your screen. What it does is it invites you to kind of wander through these spaces or this space. And it's a space that in some ways seems utterly ordinary. Okay, it's not a heroic kind of landscape. It's appreciating little things, rustic places. And I was trying to think of an analogy for us this evening. What kind of place would this be? Well, imagine if you were from the large city, Detroit or Grand Rapids, and you're not looking at Grand Rapids or Detroit. What you're seeing is basically an interest in Borculo. Okay, it's an interest in a place like Drenthe or Friesland. I mean, if you're from these places, I mean no offense here, but the point is that it's an appreciation for those out of way places. Now, as this is happening, there's also literature being developed, and the literature is tied to medicine and to health. And the idea here is that we should walk more. Sounds kind of like today's news, right? But in the 16th century, they're talking about walking for its healing properties, how important it is to go on a Sunday afternoon walk and to get a sense of tranquility and to appreciate the little things again of nature. So here's another example. Now the drawings or the prints are made in such a way as you can imagine it being from lots of different places. Okay, but what you do get the idea of very quickly is that these are, rustic places, as the name implies here. And your eye, again, you kind of want to travel down that little road and find out what's around the corner. And that's all the pleasure of seeing it. There's nothing overtly religious here. Okay, but at the same time, it's believed that this is good for your body and soul to be doing this kind of visual exercise. The imagery that I'm showing you in terms of locality are not new claimed lands. The Dutch in the 16th and 17th century are not terribly interested in polders, okay, and showing you the land that's been recently recovered. Instead, the appreciation seems to be much more in terms of what is old or what's gnarled or what's been there for a long time, weather worn. There's a sense in which they're preoccupied with what might be called the picturesque. Okay, or again, I used the word rustic earlier. Maybe that fits a little bit with nature too. Now, as your eyes wandering through this image, the foreground's rather dark, loaded with tree branches, and you kind of want to get through that and look what's going on more towards the light. This is all made in the studio. Okay, its forms look natural, but it's not painted outside like a impressionist painting. And then as you look more on the illuminated side or onto the right, I hope you can see the hunters. And what they're hunting, they're on top of a hill there, is what's kind of concealed by the branches in the foreground. If I were with you, I'd do this with a pointer. I don't know if I can you see this? Okay, right here are deer. There's all kinds of them. And your hunters are up here. So going across. Okay, now in a way, what you're doing visually is hunting. You're trying to spot things. You're letting your eyes wander through that space in order to make things out. Okay, so you're doing something, again, analogous to those who are trying to get the deer. And that's what the artist is playing on, that idea, again, of vision. So if I take you back into the 16th century, here we have a Bruegel drawing that was made into a print. And as you see this scene from St. George Gate, you have people from a variety of social classes. And they're all enjoying, again, the weather. Maybe we're not tonight, but they were then, okay? And you have that sense of ice as something, a place where anyone from the community can come together and play. So you see them skating and sledding, and everything seems to be going fine, except there's one person here, at least, who's falling onto the ice. And the reason I'm pointing that out to you is there's a Dutch metaphor about the slipperiness of life. Okay, so you, again, kind of have to be cautious as we're making our way through this world. So on the one hand, it has this kind of, I guess you'd say, negative association. You know, be careful when you're in the world. But at the same time, these people are having such, they're celebrating life. They're having such a great time. It's ambiguous. It's not straightforward. It's not condemning what they're doing. It's more that you should be enjoying life. And in the background, the most prominent thing you have in there is going to be that triumphal arch, which is important for political reasons. But then on the other side there, you're going to have a church. So you have a high horizon to give you lots of information here, but it also allows you to kind of look down on this space and try to sort out exactly what's going on. Also, I should mention to you that there is a figure in the background playing golf. Golf is like golf, but you play it on ice. And there's always this dispute in who invented the game of golf. Was it the Scots or was it the Dutch, and so forth. So if golf's your game, or golf, now you can make that out. So in the early 17th century, a mute artist by the name of Averkamp paints winter scenes. And you can tell he's been informed by what I was just showing you in terms of prints. So even though we're talking, basically 50 years later, the artists are following this schema. It's another way of saying to you, plausible fiction. Yes, he's observing nature, lots of details, to get a sense of how to make this image. But at the same time, he's borrowing from a work of art. It's artifice and nature, learning from both. Another example of what's transpiring in the 17th century is the work of Cuyp. And Albert Cuyp represents cows. And the cows here convey the idea of prosperity. In Dutch culture, the cow is almost like the bald eagle in America. It has all kinds of important symbolic meaning. The cow is understood as being tied to frugality because you can use so many different parts from it. It's tied to prosperity, fecundity. I'll try this way for you. If you read Dutch chronicles, it's not uncommon to find the phrase like this: I thank God above all else who made Holland Jerusalem. Okay, there's this kind of scriptural ideas or moral geography that takes place. And there is a sensibility of the Netherlands as being like the land of milk and honey, except in this case, it'd be milk and cheese. So it's the idea that it's kind of like Canaan, that the 17th century Dutch are in some ways now God's new chosen people. And when you see the golden light striking this setting, okay, and how pastoral all of this is and tranquil, all of that is to convey that kind of quality. Now, as you look at the background here, you do have ships, you do have a hillside, but it seems plausible. It's much more naturalistic than what we had before. Now, that's not to deny it's at the same time fantastic, okay? And the artist is using a particular kind of simple composition here, where you have a diagonal coming across over the cows, okay, a simple diagonal cutting across it, and a low horizon. And you find that quite a bit too. So he is borrowing a certain kind of way of making art. This is created again in a studio, not outside. It's not photographic. It's not a slice of life. It imitates life, but again, it's something artificial. Jan van Gooyen is really limiting his palette here. It's almost tonal. And as you look at the scene, again, it's just loaded with details. It's meticulous. It's a very small painting. And yet you can tell it's the city of Renan because of that tower. And as our eyes are wandering through that space, again, appreciating the effects of nature, as we're kind of walking with our eyes, we see fellow travelers. And that too is encouraging us to look and appreciate the space like they do. It's not as cosmopolitan, so to speak, or as cosmic, the world landscapes like we had previously. Now we're getting a closer sense of place or locality. Or Peter Moline, Landscape with an Open Gate. We're encouraged to mentally go through that open threshold. And as we do, if you look closely, you'll see that there are travelers in front of us. As we look across at the gate looks rustic. Again, it appears weather-worn, as does the building with a thatch roof behind it. And the tree, for that matter, too, conveys the qualities of wind and change. You get the idea very much that, okay, it must be late fall because the leaves are off that tree. Or maybe it's not late fall yet. Maybe it's somewhere in between, because you also have other trees where they haven't turned the colors yet. But you get that idea of change, of alteration. So it's more than just telling us about the land. It's what happens to that space. And I can tie it right away to emblems again. Because generation earlier, we get this book of signs by Fisher, which has illustrations in it with little sayings. And the illustration here, you see the tree that's lost its leaves, and then one that still has its plumage in the background. And what it says in Dutch here above it is change causes anxiety. So I don't know. I mean, as you look back at this picture, maybe some of you it causes anxiety, but I don't think it's that straightforward. Okay, it can be kind of a conversation piece where we think about change and continuity, those things which are long lasting and those things that aren't, the things that switch over in time. In a way, these are questions of temporality that relate to us as much as they do to the natural world. Jacob van Ruysdael, okay, again, uses a very low horizon, but in this case, he does so to create this huge windmill. Now, the windmill there is big to begin with, but he's accelerating the size or exaggerating the sides. Okay, the windmill is something, of course, that turns. It's going to have, again, kind of special significance in the Netherlands. It's turned by the spirit, kind of like we are. And but it's more than that. It's again this appreciation of the things that are human made, and yet juxtaposed or put next to this incredibly serene sense of nature, so you appreciate both sides. If I could take you to Detroit this evening, very large painting of the Jewish cemetery. Jacob van Ruysdael was a Baptist, okay? And he has a strong interest in water, which isn't terribly surprising, considering his orientation in terms of his faith. Now, the Jewish cemetery in Haarlem did exist. It wasn't exactly like this, and it wasn't that close to the church ruins behind it. The artist, again, is giving us kind of a plausible fiction. When you see the ruins, you're seeing something that lasts, something that changes, okay, something that's kind of picturesque or rustic. And then in the foreground, we see, again, these tombs. And as we think about the climate, the weather's changed. We sense that there was a storm. Trees are broken, branches down. And then as we look into the sky to the left, we see a rainbow. Rainbow is that idea of God fulfilling his promises. He doesn't destroy the world. It's after the flood. And this is used over and over again in Judeo-Christian tradition. And when you see that snapped branch over the water, it's illuminated in such a way as it seems to, again, have life. And the way he's rendered those tombs, those grave sites that are placed above the earth, the lids of them seem to somehow quake or move, vibrate a little bit. And so what he's giving us here is kind of again, a metaphorical way of looking at the cycle of life. So you're seeing death, destruction, and renewal. And the water leads right to the viewer. Okay, so in a way, we're given life anew in terms of seeing all this. So it has a spiritual dimension to it. And at the same time, we're again considering the effects of nature. Van Ruysdael does numerous representations of the view of Haarlem. And again, you have very low horizon line, lots of sky. Well, that's the experience you would have pretty much in the Netherlands in this area. Now, he's represented, as the title implies, the city of Haarlem. And in the city of Haarlem, the major church, St. Bavo, it has a nickname. It's Grote Kerk, which is great church. It's a big place. But what the artist has done is exaggerated the size of the church. He's made it even bigger because we associate the church with Haarlem. Okay, that's one reason he did it, but also to suggest something of the piety of the people who live here. This is incredibly, how should I put it, homegrown patriotism here, hometown pride. In the foreground are bleaching fields. And I'm going to give you a detail. When you look at the bleaching fields here, Haarlem, that's what they were known for. It's one of the major industries, making beer and bleaching. Now, I don't know, maybe the two are tendentially related in that, of course, beer isn't something you own, so to speak. It's something you rent. And the way in which they would bleach their fields is they would put, or bleach the linens, is they would soak them in urine and then spread them out into the field. So I don't know, maybe there's something about the beer, but this is something that really they're known for is the white linens. Now, what else makes them bleached is, of course, the sun. And they're thinking of the sun as, again, having religious significance. It's grace that makes this happen. It's the light of God that enables this to all take place. So it's patriotism and at the same time moralizing. If you're still not kind of recognizing this, okay, yes, there are windmills in Haarlem, but if you start looking carefully, you've got windmill after windmill after windmill after windmill. It's like making it hyper Dutch. Okay, in that sense, again, you'd appreciate this place. One of his close followers is the Frisian painter, Habema. And once again, I hope you get the idea here now. Your eyes are encouraged to go right down that avenue of trees. And again, you're kind of mentally walking or imaginatively meandering through this space. The whole thing's a setup, right? I mean, when you look in the center, it's pretty easy to tell that the artist is doing something quite simple in terms of juxtaposition of verticals and horizontals, but it's effective. Rembrandt too is doing this kind of thing. In his landscape with a stone bridge, you have this quality of light that seems again like it's divine or magical coming in. The setting is one which isn't just about place, but mood concerning the place. Again, it's about our response to a particular time and place. Vermeer, who's going to have a big show this spring in Amsterdam, large retrospective, again, does this kind of work where you sense the tranquility of this space. It's not the same as Rembrandt's light. It's clear, it's more saturated. But what he's done here is also kind of, how should I put it, playful. In that if you go to Delft and you try to stand where he made this painting, or where it looks like he made this painting, you couldn't find it. And it's because he's moved the buildings. He's rearranged the buildings to suit his compositional needs. And what happens when you see a Vermeer like this is you feel like you're really close, but at the same time you're removed. Like those little figures seem like they're incredibly far away from us. And yet the buildings on the other side of the large canal there seem like they're close to us. And yet we can't quite penetrate them or get into what's on the other side of them. And not only that, the closer you get to the painting, what ends up happening with Vermeer's work, and I think this is just incredible, is that the buildings start losing their substantiality. You feel like you're just seeing light on surfaces without even really getting at the surfaces themselves. It's again, something which is close and then just outside of our grasp. Or quaint places like the little street. You feel like you could be intimate with these people, like you're part of a neighborhood, and yet you're being ignored. They don't really pay attention to us. It's not like theater. And our eyes are encouraged to, kind of meander again, think about what's in these interiors. Doors open, doors closed, windows open, windows closed to us. You get a sense of the texture of the place, what it might be like to walk on that street, and the difference on your feet as you're coming in to the entryway or into that courtyard. It's very experiential. So some artists are working on things that are closely tied to their home cities. Pine Knocker represents a boat that could be Dutch. Fishermen doing something that Dutch fishermen did. But the setting is Italy. So we're starting to find artists trying to imitate other places as well. And there's a market for this, kind of an interest in the exotic, not just merely what is nearby. And part of the reason for that is the Dutch are preoccupied with other places. During the 17th century, you have the East Indies companies, the West Indies company. They're making fantastic maps like this one here by Blau, to give us a sense of space, of different localities that they could do trade with. And they're doing import, export of all kinds of goods. I mean, unfortunately, some of this is also dealing with human slaves, but the trade involves, much more than that. spices, and it's going to be bringing in various materials, different fabrics. And so the Netherlands is going to be, even though it's a small country, in some ways we think of it as primarily agricultural, it's going to have this component where lots of things are being learned and being brought in. Science is going to thrive there. And part of that has to do with the marvelous things that they're bringing to Amsterdam and to Leiden. Different seashells, different plants. And they're thinking about these things in much more profound ways. It's affecting the way that they see nature around them. Now, as all part of this, the artist Frans Post is sent to Brazil. Brazil was a Dutch stronghold, okay, or a Dutch colony for a while. And so he's representing life there. Now, the figures you're seeing in the foreground here are slaves. Okay, but you get the sense that they fit right into the natural schema, that everything's tranquil, everything's kind of hunky-dory. So I'm going to fully acknowledge that. Now, at the same time, if you think about the way in which he's represented Brazil, it's pretty much the same way that artists have been representing the Netherlands. A low horizon, a simple diagonal coming across. So the plant life, and it's based on his visit, his time spent in Brazil, makes sense. It's plausible. But the way he's rendered it is, again, very Netherlandish. Another example. Olinda was a Dutch missionary church. And so if you look at the church, it has, kind of a European feel to it. But then as you start letting your eyes wander through the spaces here, you're seeing all kinds of exotica, all kinds of things that you would associate with that different place. The paintings are sold back in the Netherlands. Now, the works that are being done here were commissioned by the governor of Brazil. And that governor, his home, some of you know it, you probably visit it, it's the Maurits House. The Maurits House used to be the governor of Brazil's home. And later on, it's taken over by the royal family. And that's why that collection is so fantastic. Okay, but it's tied again to Post. Now, Post didn't go alone. He went with Eckhout, and Eckhout's job was to show the still lifes. So whereas you get landscapes from Post, here we're going to get much more interest in flora and animals. And in this case, we have this local woman. Now, when you look at her at first glance, okay, I mean, it's pretty interesting, the discretion put in where the plants are located in her body. But beyond that, what she's holding is a severed human hand. And what she has in the basket are severed feet. Now, as far as we know, these people were not cannibals. Okay, so why put this kind of imagery in there? And it's probably to promote back home the need to civilize these people. Okay, so there's a way in which this is, again, scientific, empirical, but at the same time, there's more going on. It's not just describing things, it's prescribing. And some of this work, I think, can just be, incredible. I have to confess, I think that knowledge begins with wonder, that old idea. We want to figure things out. We want to learn, discover. And Eckhout's paintings encourage us to do that. So you see these two Brazilian tortoises, and their mouths are opening, and they're having a duel. And it gets us kind of involved in a little bit of a narrative between the two of them. And at the same time, we're learning about their shape, getting a little bit of understanding of their behavior, their anatomy, the fact that the heads are going to go inside the shells, and so forth. Last week, I showed a lot of imagery associated with flowers and fruit, and Eckhout's doing the same thing now, but showing citrus and bananas, things that are collected in Brazil. But the arrangement of it is pretty similar to the flower paintings we talked about last week. I want to close tonight by getting us to think about a woman artist who's actually Swiss, but someone who was very interested in representing nature. She, as I said, was Swiss by birth, or her first language would then be German. Her mother remarried after the death of her father, and she married an artist. And the artist made these tulips, a picture I showed last week. Okay, so Morel's tulip studies here were made by the woman's stepfather. He teaches her how to paint, and she's fascinated with insects and with the natural world. What ends up happening is she learns to paint, to draw, studies insects, zoology, and so forth. And she ends up getting married, moves to Nuremberg. Marriage is not so great. Her stepfather dies. Her mother needs help. The woman leaves her husband with her 2 daughters for living in the Netherlands. While there, she joins this kind of religious convent place where women, so long as they agree to remain celibate, can live together in this community. And while she's there, she goes nearby and she sees these private collections of insects and plant life and so forth, catches the attention of a collector. And ultimately what's going to happen is that collector is going to pay for, he's going to sponsor for her to have a trip to Suriname. Now, there are other reasons she wants to be in Suriname. She got a daughter that gets married and ends up there as well. But Suriname was a Dutch colony again. And while she's there, she represents the natural world. And so when you look at this here, it's the idea too, not just of the creatures, but how they come out of eggs is important. And the way in which she's rendered them makes it really dramatic. As you look at that false coral snake kind of wrapping around, and then came in there chomping at the other creature. This is the closest analogy I can give you is it's like Audubon. Okay, but it's much earlier. Part of her scientific discoveries are rendered in her illustrations. They weren't sure where exactly toads came from, whether they came out of the mud or how you get regeneration of these beings. And what she pointed out is, no, they have eggs on their bodies, and the eggs go with them as they swim through waters. And so she's showing that, and that's going to have an impact on the scientific community. Now, at the same time that's going on, and you're thinking about how the reptiles are moving, or amphibians go into the water, at the same time, you see your interest in showing plants, shells. You don't have to have them there if this is just for science. It's to convey this idea or this appreciation, again, of other places, of the exotic. And that's where I want to kind of close this tonight, is to get us to think about the way in which these are little worlds made cunningly. They're plausible fictions. They're ways in which we think about nature, but also the marvelous or artistic qualities of nature. And that this can take place in looking at flowers or at fields. It's not devoid of human interaction in many cases here. In fact, in some of these images tell us more about ourselves than they do just of the land. So thank you. I have no idea how we're doing for time here because it's not on my computer, but I think we probably have time for questions. Is that right?
We absolutely do. Your timing is perfect. It's 1 minute to 8 o'clock. So you're amazing. And thank you so much. That was so incredible, in depth, so comprehensive, and the images were amazing and beautiful, and just wow. I'm in awe here. So I'm going to encourage people, if they do have questions, to please type them into the chat. I am going to look at the chat right now. And we do have one question.
Okay.
Asking, how are the Dutch dealing today with their colonialist past?
Okay. Well, it's complicated, as most things in this world are. And the way in which they deal with the colonial past in some ways is more open than, say, the way slavery is addressed in the United States. I mean, there's so many problems and questions about now, when should American history classes begin for grade school kids and so forth. And exactly a question about how we should show slavery. They're pretty blunt about it. So, for example, in the Tropics Museum or the Tropen Museum, you walk in and the first thing you're encountered with are images, large-scale pictures of slave ships and how people were transported. And when you see the various things that were collected from their past colonies, there's also statues or sculptures of plantation owners. And they basically say, yeah, this is what this person did. This is how he made his money. This is somebody who promoted slavery. They're right up front about it. Now, all of that is, like I said, probably a little bit better than we do. But here's the flip side. Okay, we're getting really close to Sinterklaasdag, Santa Claus Day. And they have the mythical figure of Zwarte Piet or Black Peter. And so you basically get a bunch of young Dutch guys wearing blackface. Okay, now we wouldn't do that. So I don't want to give the impression that they are somehow culturally innocent or superior to what goes on in the States. So it's really a mixed bag about how you handle colonialism, because Zwarte Piet, Black Peter, is a Moor, and he is a slave. And this goes back to colonialist ideas. So it's not a pure kind of, I don't know how to put it, Christmas figure. So that's why I say to you, it's just really complicated. I mean, we could go on and on for this question, but it's something that they grapple with and at the same time kind of ignore.
That actually sounds pretty familiar to way saying some things are dealt with in the States as well. As some things are grappled with and some things are ignored. So yes. I actually, if I'm encouraging other people to write questions into the chat, I actually do have a question.
Sure.
Henry, because some of the wording you were using, talking about, again, landscape, and talking about the Dutch actually in some of their writings and of course in the art as well, looking at them at their landscape and the as sort of a new Eden, or and that the Dutch were kind of considered sort of maybe a new chosen people. Yeah. In studying American landscape painting of like the 19th century and some of the writings, they use some of that same language, like describing America as a new Eden and the American people as sort of the new chosen people. Do you think some of that is crossed over from the Dutch when immigrants came to the United States?
Yeah, I don't want to give the Dutch too much credit as if it was only them, because of course you get this in England and France and other places too. But you think of the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims came to the U.S. from Leiden. They did take a little time between England and the U.S. by stopping in the Netherlands for a while, and so yes, that did have an impact. And I would say that this idea is much broader than just thinking about the place as Canaan. You get portraits, for example, where they're comparing the sitters to Old Testament biblical couples. There are representations and stories about how the Dutch defeated the Spanish. And they'll use references to the crossing of the Red Sea as a way of indicating their power, or the way they broke dikes to get the Spanish to flee. Okay, that would be described in biblical terms. So there are lots of these kinds of analogies, and yes, it does come across in terms of the U.S. as well. I mean, sometimes I'll joke about being in West Michigan. I'll refer to the city to the east of us as Jerusalem, right? I mean, there's this kind of joking quality about it too. Yeah.
I appreciate that. That's very funny. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so Ricky has a question. In so many of the landscapes you shared, the images of people or animals are very hidden. Is that another way the artists are trying to guide our eyes, similar to the roads or paths that invite us to follow them?
Exactly. So we're encouraged to look and to, well, this is something that started in, like I said, devotional paintings. So initially you had this idea in paintings where you were encouraged to imagine the life of Christ, and your eyes would go all over the place. And then from that practice of doing imaginative pilgrimage, so to speak, came the Stations of the Cross. And the Stations of the Cross, for those of you familiar with it, are really set. You know, they're always the same and measured in a uniform way. You're not encouraged to wander. It tells you each step. The paintings didn't go in that direction. The paintings stayed much more in this idea of, no, you keep wandering. You keep try to find the little things, and they become conversation pieces. It's a little bit, they're not completely hidden, okay, but you have to do a little bit more work. You might be able to get like the major parts of the picture, but you've got to let your eyes kind of study the details. And it's, again, not that they become a-religious. There's always kind of an implicit religious kind of thing going on with these pictures. But at the same time, it's more than just like a visual sermon, right? Or an emblem. It's this sense of just appreciating and lovingly look at details, whether, again, they're microscopic or telescopic. That stays.
Actually, I have another question. Would most of the pieces that you showed this evening, you mentioned the art market in the very beginning of your talk. So would most of these pieces been the types of pieces that would have been in someone's home?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this would have been, so some of these pieces would, of course, encourage people, like as you said, to go out and wander, but also giving them sort of that window out into nature and into the world from within their own
Sure.
internal, interior space.
Yes. Okay. So another way of saying this is these are made for upper middle class and above people, and they're spending their money on works of art, and those who are buying are primarily from cities. So you're in this urban environment. Granted, I'm sure you have beautiful canals next door and so forth too. I don't want to minimize that, but these kind of give you a feeling of the countryside. And I pointed out to you because, and I probably should have said this in a lecture, is because farmers, guys that are growing things or collecting eggs, are not buying paintings. Okay, I mean, yes, there is kind of a social class thing going on here. Frankly, they can't afford them. And, they would have no, I guess, place for them. Okay, they might buy prints, which would be cheaper. But I mean, like my ancestors, I don't think were preoccupied with the visual arts. They're more preoccupied putting food on the table. So I don't want to give the impression that everybody in the Netherlands had paintings in their homes. But at the same time, more Dutch people had paintings in their homes than any other place in the world at this point. So prosperity made it happen. And the subject matter too, flowers and landscapes, seascapes, those are things that aren't going to offend your neighbors. Okay, so if somebody comes into your house, you don't know if they're going to be Protestant or Catholic, it's 50%. You want to make sure it's an image that everybody's going to be fine with. And the things in nature are much more ecumenical, okay, than if you're showing a saint, or, you know, if you have a crucifixion scene, some Protestants would have problems with that, others not. So it becomes much more complicated. And at the same time, the church isn't really sponsoring a lot of art. The government of the Netherlands is a little bit more democratic too. And even the royal family, they're collecting, but not on the same scale as elsewhere. And yet in this instance, there's kind of a democratization of the arts, that we're getting more people buying and making images.
Okay. So we have a question from Claire. For these artists, or many of these artists, were their works commissioned, or did they create their own ideas and then try and sell them? And if they were commissioned, how were the themes chosen?
Okay. The vast majority of what I've showed you tonight were not commissioned. Okay, the ones at the end here, yeah, I mean, it's part of a project. So the expectation was that the artist would make these studies of toads and so forth. But the landscapes I've been showing you, by and large, were purchased at an art dealer. And here's the way it kind of worked. As an artist, you would develop your own brand. You know, so your own style, and then, you know, you hope that you're attracting collectors to buy your art, right? I mean, there's an entrepreneurial element to all this. And some artists are going to become very wealthy, and other artists are going to go bankrupt. So it's a complicated matter, just like you'd expect industries to be here. There's a kind of risk involved. And when artists figure out, hey, this really works, people like this, well, they continue doing it. And if they get a sense that, okay, this seems old hat, people want change, they reorient, they do different things. So it's not that terribly different as a business, so to speak, than other businesses. But again, commissioning these kinds of works are pretty rare.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm leaving the chat up for another moment. If anyone else has any other questions, to put into the chat real quick. Give it another moment. Nothing pops in otherwise. Okay. Right. I think we are concluding for this evening. And Henry, thank you again so much for just an incredible talk. Getting some messages into the chat saying that it was really excellent. So thank you for such an in-depth exploration and descriptions of really getting us to look carefully. Just amazing. We just appreciate your time and your expertise so very much. And we encourage, now that you all have this great knowledge of Dutch landscape, please come and visit the Holland Museum and check out some incredible Dutch landscapes and use this knowledge. So thank you again, Henry. Thank you everyone for being here this evening and making the change with us to be on Zoom. We appreciate it, and we hope we will see you again soon. And have a terrific evening. Thank you again.
One last thing before you cut me off.
No, go ahead.
I want to thank all of you, and also encourage you next time you get a chance to go upstairs and see the Jan van Hoyen. You know, it's a fine example from this landscape tradition. So we have opportunities here in West Michigan to learn more about these objects, and by all means, go to the museum. So thank you. I'd tell you all to drive home safe, but it looks like most of you are already there. So take care of yourselves.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome. Thank you.